This episode of Tim's Enthusiast Garage is brought to you by Honest Speed Shop and Falcon Tire. Welcome to the very first edition of Tim's Enthusiast Garage in Tim's Enthusiast Garage. Now, like many of you, until Gran Turismo came out, I didn't even know what a GTR was. When I got Gran Turismo, my world changed. I got the gunmetal gray R32 GTR, and I realized the performance potential of this car. I started reading straight away. What the heck is the GTR? And how do I get one? Most of you probably already understand the story of the GTR, the significance of the GTR. But I really dug in. Naginori Ito became one of my heroes, and this car and its success in a variety of different race series became the kind of thing that I was really interested in, and it's one of the main things that really got me interested in importation of cars in general. The recipe for the GTR is pretty much a recipe for making any car great. 3,000 pounds and 276 horsepower, reportedly 276 horsepower, is that magic 10 pounds for every 1 horsepower that I think makes everything at least interesting. And the GTR is beyond interesting because it has well beyond 276 from the factory. Now, when I started to get interested in the GTR, the main thing that was really interesting to me is the similarity in spec with cars like the Porsche 959. 959 has 2 turbos. 959 is all-wheel drive. In the same way that the 959 sort of changed what was expected for a supercar and took technology to the highest level possible, Nissan did the same thing with the Nissan GTR. And the technology in this car is unbelievable. They developed HiCus for this car. Again, 4-wheel steering, 4-wheel drive, 2 turbochargers on an inline 6, a super advanced all-wheel drive system that was mostly rear-wheel drive when you didn't want all-wheel drive, and was all-wheel drive when you did. The tuning on this car really kind of turned you into a hero, because when you drove this car, really drove this car, it sort of dedicated itself to sideways. And you can hold this thing sideways at ridiculous angles all day long, and sometimes even in an unintentional manner. It's gonna kick out a little sideways, and you're gonna look cool. Or like an idiot if you don't know what to do. It doesn't really suffer fools well. Another thing about the R32 that really kind of piqued my interest is magazines like Performance Car, which became Evo magazine, which was sort of like what I consider to be the finest automotive publication at that time, loved the GTR. And it was sort of like they pit every car against the GTR. It's kind of funny because no matter what car they would put up against the GTR, it would be pretty close, if not having the GTR come out on top. There's a lot of things that make the GTR a pretty amazing car. Tons of race win victories are certainly one. Ubiquitous praise in the media at the time is another element that makes this car sort of second to none as a collector's car. The other, particularly here in the US, is relative rarity. They did make a lot of the R32 GTR, around 43 or 44,000 of these cars, which isn't that rare. Now, when you consider that not all of these cars remain in existence, and when you consider that most of these cars were for Japanese consumption and then got disseminated all across the globe, it's a pretty rare car in the United States, even if you think that maybe 1,000 of them have come here. The other thing is, when I started looking for a GTR, very few of them were in good nick. A lot of them had rust issues, a lot of them had been modified into the ground, and I really didn't want that. I liked the fact that the car was so supreme as a stock car. Now, everything is faster than it now, but still, for a car from that era, it's pretty amazing. And one thing that really surprised me when I got the GTR is just how amazing the car is. Everything on this car is honed to a level that was completely different than any Japanese car I had driven at the time. Now, if you've watched Tim's Enthusiast Garage, you know that I grew up a bit of a Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche snob. So most of my interests lie in the European realm. This car, I think, if you compare it to, say, my Audi 90, which is a similar year car, my Audi 90 Coupe Quattro, this car has way better gear shift feel. In fact, the shifter on this car is one of the best cars of any that I own currently, and probably in the top 50 of all cars I've ever driven in terms of just shifter feel. This car has a little bit heavier clutch, but I actually like that. I think it kind of puts you in touch with the performance of the car. But just the tractability of it, the almost non-turbo nature of it, it doesn't run a lot of boost, so it doesn't feel super boosty, and it kind of always has good torque through the range, and it revs forever. There were a lot of surprises. How solid the car felt to me. Japanese cars from that era also kind of had I don't want to say a cheap feel, but the Accords I had driven and the Preludes and those sorts of things always kind of left me thinking, my German cars are so superior. Whereas this car really has a solid feel. And the brakes, everything about this car is super well judged. So in terms of buying a GTR, I think it's a no-brainer in terms of a collectible car. One thing I can say for sure is this car does have a fair bit of mechanical complexity. If you're scared of mechanical complexity, the GTR might not be your jam. This is an extremely complex car, and I will say before I bought one, looking at the forums did not put me at ease. Now, the one thing that sort of did put me at ease, and the one reason that I did end up with the car, is that almost every car on the forum is not stock. Almost every car on the forum is like going for 1,000 horsepower, or trying to fit the widest wheels possible, or trying to get it as low as possible. And with this car, I really wanted it to be, sort of OEM plus. That's kind of my general theme for anything in terms of keeping it, whether I'm modifying it or keeping it stock. I want it to be sort of the best version of itself that it could be. As far as buying tips are concerned, check for rust. I can't emphasize this enough. Almost every car that I looked at was a rust bucket. So definitely check this car with a magnet and make sure there hasn't been any shady repair. From a collector car perspective, originality is the name of the game. Even if you think you want to modify this car, get the best original example you can find. And don't be afraid to use a resource like Japanese Classics or Duncan Motors. Let me also add that the interior on this car is surprisingly taken up by things like the transmission. It's kind of tight getting in and out of this car for as big as it is. GTR is a pretty pleasant place to be. One thing I'd say is that it is extremely short gearing. Like many of the Japanese cars from this era, it was designed never to leave the island. And the island's not very big, so designing a car that does 180 miles an hour really wasn't on their agenda. Now, this car at 60 miles an hour is around 3,000 RPMs, maybe a little bit more than that. And if you baseline that against whatever it is you drive, you'll see that that's a pretty short gear ratio. In fact, some of that crazy acceleration time comes from the fact that it's got pretty short gearing. So that's one thing to think about when purchasing a Skyline.
For me, games like Gran Turismo and Forza solidified this car as the sort of 57 Chevy or 69 Camaro of our era. I think the R32 Skyline is that car. When you see a GTR on the road, when people see a GTR on the road, they go bananas. And I think a lot of that is owed to Gran Turismo and Forza. This car is a beast in real life and a beast in the game. It also really gives you an opportunity to have a car that is from the factory as stout as a car that has an engine swap or is really built a heavily tuned tuner car. And it's nice to be able to have this car that really is sort of all powerful, all supreme, just from the factory. So in that respect, it's kind of one of the perfect cars for me. I love it. Kids love it. If you're watching this video, you probably love it. And like many of the cars I cover on Tim's Enthusiast Garage, it's only going to go up in value. This is a car you can buy intelligently now. It will be worth more later. So is it a car you should add to your garage? If you love the R32 GTR, yeah, I genuinely think so. Please also be sure to check out my website where I've got blog posts, merchandise like this poster of the R32 GTR, as well as t-shirts, including this Lotus t-shirt. And please, please, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and tell a friend. Thanks, and see you next time.